Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 31st of July, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, myself, Brian Gerrish, and I'm delighted to have David Scott with me in the studio. David, you made it.
I made it down from rainy Scotland and all the way through rainy England and didn't see any global warming. And I'm here for the next few days providing a bit of holiday cover for Mike, who's getting a well-earned break.
Yeah, excellent. And we're also joined by Mark Anderson today, who of course is in the States. But let's crack on. There's nothing to worry about because well-being is all in the hands of the government.
Yeah, so we start here. We start in Scotland. It doesn't stay in Scotland because none of these agendas are coming from our nations. They're all coming from much higher up. So we have here the Wellbeing Economy Government, so WeGo, an announcement from the Scottish Government. They say we're making the transition to a wellbeing economy. This is a top priority for the Scottish Government. And this means building an economy that operates within safe environmental limits and serves the collective, interesting word, well-being of current and future generations. Our economic transformation will reshape our economy, delivering a just transition to net zero. So you see carbon ideologies at the heart of this. A nature-positive economy, whatever that means, and based on the principles of equality, prosperity and resilience, not any longer based on the principles of economics. So they go on and they say, well, look, we've set up this group to enable cross-government engagement. The group was launched at the OECD's World Forum in Incheon in South Korea in 2018. And it comprised Scotland, Iceland and New Zealand. So not exactly a huge international group. And it was being run essentially by Joe Stiglitz, the economist, former advisor to the Scottish Government, incidentally, and part of the OECD's high-level group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress. And it's now grown. It now includes Iceland, Wales, Finland, Scotland and New Zealand, and Canada are also participating. So you see here all the woke countries are lining up for this. Now, first things first. The Scottish Government has a bit of a problem with well-being. It can't define it. No one can define it. More on this just momentarily. But if we go back to the judgment on named person was all based on the well-being of the child, and the Supreme Court said well-being is not defined. The only guidance is provided by listing 8 factors, the Tyranny indicators, and it says that they are themselves notably vague. So they couldn't define it then, they can't define it now, but it's starting to attract some attention. So here we see a newsletter, a very excellent newsletter on Substack, and I encourage people to go and look at this. It's Igor Chudov, and he's writing, the World Economic Forum supported well-being economy is a reincarnation of Marxian totalitarianism. And he starts off with the famous WEF line on, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. And this is what it's all about. So one of the areas he looks at is Australia. So we've been looking at Australia as well. And here we see the Australian Government Treasury, interesting department, is they're running the first well-being framework. And it's all about measuring what matters. So their framework is based on 12 domains, not the 8 Tyranny indicators. They've expanded it. 12 domains of well-being, including health, education, work, relationships and community. So you see the totalitarian nature of this. Everything's included. And the health reference here, Brian, of course, is mental as well as physical health. So what you think, how you think, all becomes part of the well-being economy. And they continue that measuring well-being is challenging, as many of the factors that contribute to it are difficult to quantify. Yeah, this is the problem. They can't define it. Brian, you want to come in at that point?
Well, only, of course, that if you can't define it, it gives them unlimited flexibility as to what they're actually bringing in and how it's going to run. From their point of view, that's perfect.
So when they're saying measuring what matters, they are then referring to the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Community Development, their well-being framework, economic Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, beg your pardon. They've got a well-being framework that all these various countries are borrowing from. And you see that it's including health and housing and income and wealth and environment and everything. It's absolutely everything. And links from that document then take us to, again from the OECD, well-being and mental health towards an integrated policy approach. So this is looking at your mental health, not that they can define that particularly well either. And how it's being measured, and this is going to be part of the measurements that will replace GDP for measuring how the nation's doing. These are all indefinable, intangible things, and they're all being rolled up into this measure that's going to be used to dictate government policy and essentially to rule us. So we go nip back here to Igor's newsletter, and he asked the question: can we measure the above person's happiness or well-being using the exact same scale for each of them? I hope that you, my dear reader, would agree that it's going to be that it's crazy to apply a one-size-fits-all scale of happiness to everyone. Yet this is what the WEF and their ideological parent, the Club of Rome, want. In the book Earth for All, the Club of Rome then goes on to define its version of well-being, and again, it's just a list. They have no definition. It's a list: dignity, nature, connection, fairness, participation. So they're setting that well-being as the ultimate goal for economies. So this is going to be, it's the economy stupid, this is going to run everything worldwide. They've come up with an average well-being index. This is an alternative to GDP. And when they're talking about money, they're quite specific. They say a recent study from the Earth for All initiative confirms that the fulfillment of human needs and aspirations does not increase considerably when GDP per person grows beyond a threshold of $15,000 per person per year. So that's how much you'll be allowed. After that, you're just being a blight on the environment, I'm afraid. And of course, this is all about controlling the narrative as well, because you can't run this Marxism out if people are going to point out that it's Marxism. So in the same document, the Club of Rome are very concerned. They're saying that the biggest problem of our time is the inability to distinguish fiction from fact. Now, we would probably agree with that, but we would have the opposite view, because all of the COVID initiatives, this was all based on fiction presented as fact. When they say distinguish fiction from fact, they're reversing the truth, right? They're saying the biggest problem they have is people are sticking with facts and are not adopting the Club of Rome's fiction. And just to finish off here, we've got Igor Churov is commenting that the Marxian economy demands equality of outcomes. And he then describes how they're looking at a great leap forward, a version of the Chinese Communist Party's Great Leap Forward. This plan is named the Scenario Great Leap. This involves an abandonment of Western style of thought called decolonizing the mind, and an introduction of measures promoting extreme income equality. And they go on to, he's got an extract from the Club of Rome book here. He says that by 2050, or they say, Club of Rome say, by 2050, the top 10% will take less than 40% of national incomes in all regions. And there'll be universal basic dividend or universal basic income is going to be brought in. So this is the new form of the communist control of how much everyone gets and how the entire economy works. And so this is universal basic income, which we've talked about in the past. And, beg your pardon. And that's how much that you're going to be allowed. It's going to be very tightly controlled. And the Club of Rome finishes off by saying, those in the wealthiest countries are disproportionately responsible for the world's environmental impacts. Much of elite consumption places excessive costs on the rest of society. So it's all justified based on the climate alarmism, but it's all about centralized control over the economy, and over the economy now defined as everything, including your mental health.
But if you see it for what it is, you're a conspiracy theory, and King's College is going to be after you, as you will see a little bit later in the news. But of course, money and well-being and clean explosives mean that we can fight a more hostile and more unpleasant war in Ukraine. And the little section I've got here is prompted by one of our viewers that asked me about a particular article in the Telegraph where General Dannett, retired general, was commenting on the fighting. The headline was "Ukraine is on the verge of splitting Russia's army as Kiev's full operational design becomes clearer. We can expect a decisive battlefield victory soon." So we have a look at this gentleman, Mr. Decisive, apparently, except when he starts commenting about the Ukrainian battlefield victories, it becomes rather maybe. So let's have a look at what he said. After weeks of patient probing of the Russian defense lines and absorbing irritating criticism from those safely away from the front line, there'll be all the British politicians, of course, the Ukrainian counter-offensive is gaining real momentum. Well, of course, the truth is it is absolutely not. But he goes on to say, over the past 2 months, the Ukrainian battlefield medics have treated many soldiers suffering traumatic amputations as these defensive positions have been probed for their weaker points. He's talking about the Russian positions. This has been a bloody, painstaking process, but one that was essential if the counteroffensive stood any chance of success. The moment would seem to be now or in the next few days and weeks. So he's got it pretty well defined there. It might happen at some stage. Then he talks about the Zaporizhia front. He says that a thrust has been made towards Tokmak. Then the quantifier comes in. This seems to be a reconnaissance force by one of the Western equipped attack brigades. So the general's not even too sure about the units he's talking about. But should this probe break into the Russian lines and offer the possibility of a breakthrough, then the bulk of the Ukrainian second echelon force, the 10th Corps, could be committed towards Melitopol on the coast. So we can see that General Dana is very uncertain about everything he's talking about, and that's because what he's trying to say about the front is not true. The Ukrainians are not having a successful counteroffensive. He talks of this may soon create the circumstances for a breakout beyond the defensive zone and into more open country. A successful strike on the axis Tokmak to Melitopol could split the Russian forces, presenting the possibility of those in the Kherson region being cut off and surrounded. This should not be an article in the Telegraph, David, because it simply has not got the substance to back up the former chief of the General Staff commenting. This is, I think we'll just bring this up on the screen, this is a spun piece telling the public what his masters basically want to hear, that Ukraine is winning when in fact Ukraine is not winning.
It's a remarkable piece because it's all speculation, it's all imagination, and it's not what you'd expect from a military man. You'd expect something much more precise. You would expect something that shows knowledge and understanding. We've seen where the Ukrainians have pushed into, and it's maybe something like 5-6 kilometers into formerly Russian-held territory in some places. But we've also seen that they've not yet reached the main Russian lines of defense. And it seems to be entirely too early to talk about breakthroughs when the main engagement's not even started.
This is correct. So we've got a little bit of film which we're going to just play on the slide, and we'll take you through it. Now, this has actually come from Weeb Union. I'm very open in saying UK Column is very happy to be using a lot of the excellent analysis. But in this extraordinary event, a Russian tank, which has come in from the left of screen, stops a whole Ukrainian advance. And as the time moves on, you'll see a vehicle come in from the right of screen. And you'll see that eventually this is followed by other vehicles which are simply held up by the single Russian tank and the Russian artillery, and ultimately in some very, very unpleasant scenes. The vehicles now clustered to the right of the tree line are destroyed by the combination of the Russian tank and the artillery. The Russian tank at one point backs off to the left of your screen and then makes another advance. But ultimately, this full attack by the Ukrainians is absolutely brought to a halt, and the vehicles, about 7 or 8 of them, are all destroyed. This has been happening across the front, and of course it's partly due to the fact that the Ukrainians are expected to advance without any air cover, something that General Danat would never ever have allowed the British Army to do, because it's a suicide mission. But for the Ukrainians, they can die. I'd just like to say to the viewers, check this material for yourself. There are many, many good reports. They're producing accurate reports and snippets from the front with videos, photos, geolocation. And this is providing, in some cases, a sort of minute by minute, certainly hour by hour update on what's happening. So I've mentioned Weeb Union. We've also got the military summary channel. We've got Free Russia, and we've got many other people commentating. And of course, their reporting far outpaces the BBC. So at this point, we'll bring in Mark Anderson. Mark, tragedy in Ukraine, much of it through the efforts of the US with weapons and money. But of course, can we say who's in charge of America? It's becoming ever more difficult at the moment. Welcome.
Great to be here, guys, like usual. Yeah, this first slide, this is kind of an interesting item, given the Kennedy family's history and what I've referred to on the show as the ironic Kennedy retirement plan for any of them that got into high office from that well-known American family. Here we have from Politico, RFK Jr. fumes at Biden administration over Secret Service protection. And this one is, to be sure and to be fair, a little open for debate. It's possible that RFK Jr. is seeking Secret Service protection a little too soon. But what he's basically saying is the Secret Service and the overall federal government that's responsible for this stuff is denying him Secret Service protection. Now, moving on from there, this is a little bit from Politico from July 28th. RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign slammed the Biden administration Friday, that's this past Friday, alleging politics was behind the Democratic presidential candidate being denied Secret Service protection. And he noted, since the assassination of my father in '68, candidates for president are provided Secret Service protection, but not me, RFK Jr. wrote in a tweet. Now, CNN did publish an article, and I'm looking at another screen over here, where there's a quote from Jonathan Wackrow, a CNN law enforcement analyst and former Secret Service agent. They did say, we are too far out from the election, and Kennedy just doesn't meet the criteria. And that's what this Mr. Wackrow said. He's not a major presidential candidate. Get that. You can make as many requests as you want. Unless you meet that criteria that's been set forth, it's just not warranted. And it says here, pardon me, that Kennedy is entitled to argue that he should be given special treatment because of his family's history. His father, the senator and Democratic presidential candidate RFK, was assassinated in '68, and his uncle JFK in '63. When another uncle, Ted Kennedy, was considering a 1980 presidential run, President Jimmy Carter at the time preemptively granted Ted Kennedy Secret Service protection. And there's a note in here that Obama was an exception to all of this and received very early Secret Service protection, as Time magazine and other establishment organs very aggressively promoted Obama very early in his presidential aspirations. But at any rate, the main thing here is that they're saying Kennedy is not a major presidential candidate. But the other side of the story, of course, is that with a name like that and a history like that, this is really a very debatable item. And Dennis Kucinich, who I met at the Texas Independent Convention back in early April that I covered for UKC, this is what Kucinich had to say. Kucinich ended up being Kennedy's campaign manager. In response to CNN's request for comment, for CNN's fact check, Kennedy campaign manager Dennis Kucinich called CNN's assessment pretty ignorant and argued that we have been unable to understand the trauma inflicted on the nation by the assassinations of the 1960s. And Kucinich also noted that Obama did have Secret Service protection at this same point in his campaign that RFK is in now. So it's just kind of an interesting item here that someone from that family with that history is not being treated like a major presidential candidate. And I think that although it may be too early, I think that RFK himself and Kucinich are correct in saying that politics is at play here. They don't want to acknowledge that RFK is a major candidate because hands down, Biden would lose to RFK Jr. There's no doubt about it. So this one bears watching, and we'll see what happens in the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, and the optics on this mark for Biden are just horrendous because he's essentially disrespecting the Democratic Party and indeed the nation of America's own history in doing this. And it just makes him look, well, cheap, really. And also like he's running scared of this candidate. I mean, politically, this looks just inept.
Yeah, Biden himself on his own steam could never beat Kennedy. I don't think so. I think the Kennedy name and his intelligence and his passion for what he does, I think would win a lot of voters. And the Kennedy family has traditionally been, of course, a kind of a mainstay of the Democratic Party. The way the Democratic Party is shunning the Kennedy family in general is ironic and a little difficult to understand.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. We will continue to watch. Now, UK Column is putting out information for our audience today, but we're being watched very carefully because apparently it's conspiracy. Let's have a look at this King's College report, and a very big thank you to one of our viewers that sent it through. It's the Policy Institute, Conspiracy Belief Amongst the UK Public and the Role of Alternative Media. But let's blow this part up on screen. I missed it when I initially looked at the first page. The report has been prepared for BBC News and BBC Radio 4 podcasts. So a little bit of Mariana Spring priming in here, I would suspect, David. And we're going to run through this quite quickly so we can have a little bit of a chat about it. But here is one of the key authors, Professor Bobby Duffy, Professor of Public Policy and Director of the Policy Institute, worked across public policy areas in a 30-year career, including being seconded to the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit. So we can expect him to be pretty unbiased politically, I'd imagine. And if we go to the second man, Dr. Rod Dacomb, a reader in politics in the Department of Political Economy, Director of the Centre for British Politics and Government. That's a very interesting organisation. Faculty of Social Services, always trustworthy. And then his current research includes inequalities in democratic participation, conspiracy theories, contemporary democracies, measuring the effectiveness of democratic innovation. So Dr. Rod is all for democracy, except when people actually stand up and challenge the government, when he likes to label them as conspiracy theorists. So an interesting gentleman. We couldn't get to speak to him. A little bit of detail from the report, just to show you how it looks. Around a third of the public say various conspiracy theories are probably or definitely true. There's no work as to whether there is truth present or not. It's simply labelled as conspiracy theory. And of course, you can see how the loading is definitely false in red, so it catches your eye, but the definitely true is looking a little bit weaker in green. Oh, but what have we got here? People who get much of their information from alternative media sources are far more likely to believe the pandemic was part of a forced vaccination effort. And if we look at the top, that naughty newspaper, The Light, has been doing most of the damage, followed by our very own Patrick Henningsen, apparently 21st Century Wire. And the UK column is way down in the middle of this. Yet I thought we did a lot of work on this, David.
Well, we were blasting away on matters pandemic-related for 2.5 years.
And we put up the information from the MHRA and the yellow card system itself, but King's College doesn't really want to pay attention to this. So let's follow it on through as quickly as we can. A third of the public overall think it's true that great replacement theory is happening, and outlets like 21st Century Wire, The Light, The Expose, True Social and Breitbart, those naughty people are involved. UK column, here we are, buried in the middle. And let's go to this, greater news consumption from alternative media sources. 21st Century Wire and The Light in top place again, they're winning that. UK column seems to be buried away in the body of the text. And if we have a look at some different graph lineups, people who believe and have read a conspiracy theory about 15-minute cities, well, all of a sudden, UK column is climbing up the ladder. Now, this is interesting because compared to vaccines, our commentary on 15-minute cities is very, very minor. But according to King's College, we're a bit of a danger on that one. Let's have a look at this. YouTube is the top answer. If you ask people about Great Reset, the UK column there is on 3%, but it appears the light has disappeared down to the bottom at 1%. 21st Century Wire has dropped to 2% there. Seems to me to slightly be different from the reality from UK column's point of view. This is about central bank digital conspiracies, UK column there at 2%, and the light right down at 1% there. So well done, the light. And if we dig into more details about the authors of this report, here's Dr. Rod Dacomb again. We've got a research note here, Understanding Offline COVID-19 Conspiracy Theories, a content analysis of the Light Truth paper. Yet this was done way back in September 2021, David. So clearly they were lining up to give the BBC the ammunition it needed to attack the Light newspaper.
Since 2021, obviously, almost everything the Light newspaper was reporting on and what she was holding to be a conspiracy theory has obviously been acknowledged as being truthful.
Correct.
Has he revised that piece or withdrawn anything or apologised or said, well, actually, these people had a point?
No.
No. Okay.
Right. So we'll follow this one through because there's a lot in this report, but essentially we want to see whether we can challenge King's College. Not that they had any involvement in the government's COVID policy at all, but we think we might be able to ask a few questions of the college itself, and we'll see whether they want to respond. But in the meantime, if you're out there watching and listening to UK Column News and you like what we're doing, then please do support us. This is absolutely key. We are expanding. We can expand faster with more financial support from our viewers. And I'd like to say a big thank you to the viewers to date who are the ones who are making UK Column grow. Thank you so much for all your help. Now, you can buy something from the shop. That would also assist us. And we'd also like to say do share the material because this is one of the key reasons that we publish when we're talking about what's happening. It's so that you can take the material and share it far and wide. And David, we've got a little advert here for the event back in August.
No, this is the next event.
I beg your pardon.
This is the follow-up event. Brian and I both spoke at a rally for peace and freedom in August in Edinburgh. This is the follow-up event. It's going to be held in Glasgow, at Glasgow Green, 1 p.m. Saturday, August 26th. I'll be speaking there. David Clues, Lauren Wilson, Alex Pierce, and Colin Buchanan of Glasgow Against NATO Action Committee. We'll all be speaking. So if you are in Scotland or can be in Scotland, please come along and listen to us there.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we're just going to pop up the advert for AV13 again. And once again, I'd like to say to the audience that UK Column has supported AV13 for many years. And we promised Ian Crane that we would help AV13 kickstart the live events. And so Sunday, the 22nd of October this year, that's going to happen in Milton Keynes. I will be speaker, but lead speaker, I'll say, but I'll also be handing over the baton to Gary Frawn, who will be taking the lead for future events. And we'd really like to say a big well done to the Alternative View team And of course, all that work by Ian Crane, which has created so much information for so many people. Now, we've also had a couple of emails in. Alex intimated this one a few days ago, but a lady telling us a story about a friend. She went to a man's house to buy some plants. Lovely man, 78 years old. His wife was very ill. He said she was suffering with long COVID, full of blood clots in her lungs and major issues with her eyes. They said that the NHS had told the lady that there isn't much that can be done to help her. As we were leaving, he opened up more and said they were going for a scan in Redditch, and that this was the fifth one that the NHS had given her. He said they had to sign something to say they won't speak to anybody about it. When I asked why, he said because they have an inquiry thing going on and they don't want anybody to know. So the key question is the inquiry just for that particular NHS location in Redditch, or is it something to do with the fact that we have more and more people suffering these blood clot problems? And over the weekend, I actually was walking the dog. I met a lady who lives fairly close to me, and she told me that she'd suffered terrible clots in her legs ever since she was vaccinated.
And one of the questions, Brian, is, of course, how much of long COVID is, in fact, vaccine reaction?
Well, of course, we don't know, and King's College doesn't want anybody to know, because if you dare ask the questions, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, we'd like to ask for a little bit of help from Australia. We know we've got a lot of viewers in Aussie. This one was sent through to us, and it's saying that Vinnie Eastwood and Billy TK have been suffering in the prison system and the judicial system, such as it is in Australia. So we're flagging it up. We are paying attention, but anybody that's got information, please let us know. And also a correction from UK Column. I mentioned a few days ago that a ship called HMS Diamond had gone through nuclear fallout. I'd got the name wrong. It was HMS Diana. So this is the Telegraph report of the ship, which in 1956 was deliberately sailed through the fallout of a nuclear explosion. And in the years subsequently, men died mainly of very aggressive cancers. And the Ministry of Defence in UK stalled all their calls for help and support. So that was very sad. And where does that now bring us? It's on to Mark again, and you're going to be talking to us about the World Health Organization.
Yes, this is ongoing coverage, of course, about the developments of the international health regulations on a parallel track with the very skeptically viewed WHO pandemic treaty or instrument. Of course, they like to avoid that word treaty, so the Senate in the U.S. may not act. But anyway, this is a reiteration from last week, this slide here. James Roguski on Substack is probably doing the most groundbreaking research on a day-by-day basis of these developments. And again, he can be reached, he doesn't mind this, U.S. callers, but other callers, he can be reached at 310-619-3055. That's his number, 310-619-3055. He invites calls. He wants people to get involved if they're so inclined. His website is jamesroguski.substack.com, and exitthewho.com is one of his main websites. Moving on from there, though, here's the newer development in the next slide. This here is stoptheglobalagenda.com. And it, of course, it shows the United Nations logo to the left, the World Health Organization's very similar logo to the right. And we have to remember, some people tend to forget that WHO is part of the UN system. It's based on the same philosophy and the same view of humanity. So those that say, well, they look at the preliminary drafts of the treaty or the changes in the IHR regs, they'll say, well, we see no explicit evidence that they want to cancel freedom of health choice and freedom of consent regarding health. But if you look at the UN system and the UN Charter and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, you see that the UN as a system, as a world system with its philosophy, considers human rights as revocable and conditional. Very important to keep in mind. But these 4 tracks along the bottom are what are really important. I'm not sure you can enlarge that anymore, but these are the tracks that are going on now. Track 1, the UN's high-level political declaration having to do with the WHO stuff, to be adopted on September 20th of this year. Track 2, going from left to right, amendments to the international health regulations, the most recent amendments that were adopted May 27 of 2022. Those must be rejected by December 1st of this year. Track 3, 300 plus new amendments to the IHR must be submitted by those that are working on them by mid-January of next year. And track 4, the actual framework convention, aka pandemic treaty, as I've noted, to be adopted the last week of May in 2024. So that's kind of the broad cross-section of the tracks, the 4 parallel tracks that are going on, and all the dates. Very important update.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. Well, David, you're going to continue with more analysis of what the United Nations up to with our common agenda.
Yeah, so I think, Brian, calling it our common purpose might have been too much of a giveaway. So they've called it our common agenda, and this came out during the COVID lockdown. So here we see it's the Secretary General's vision. He has a vision, and it's going to be using effective multilateralism. So it's meant to put everyone to at ease. It's, we're not eliminating the nation state. More on that in a moment. To better respond and deliver for the people and the planet. And it's all about delivering those sustainable development goals. And there's a major focus of this, which is a summit of the future. This will be held in 2024, so not very far away. So here we see Antonio Guterres talking about his vision. The choices we make or fail to make today could result in breakdown or a breakthrough to a greener, better, safer future. The choices are ours to make. Apparently those are the only 2 choices, Brian. I think that's quite significant. The background to this, it started in September 2020, an unusual time to be coming up with an initiative like this. We request the Secretary General to report back before the end of the current year, basically, with recommendations to advance our common agenda to respond to current and future challenges. So as COVID was raging, they were looking to use the opportunity to develop the ideas. Now, and what are those ideas? Well, there's several things underpinning them. First, now is the time to re-embrace global solidarity. So they were looking to use the crisis. Right? This was at the heart of the COVID crisis. Now is the time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good. We must include a global vaccination plan to deliver vaccines against COVID-19 into the arms of millions of people who are still denied this basic life-saving measure. So all of this is now aged very poorly, but this is what was driving it forward. And they even put in the document, in the Secretary General's report, this wonderful image. To face the coronavirus, says the protester, we must work together and listen to the experts. That one in particular has not aged well, right? The experts have been wrong and wrong and wrong again. But back in 2020, there was still enough credibility left for that narrative to be run. Now, the second issue they go for is now is the time to renew the social contract between governments and the people within societies. So this is an entire restructuring of how government works and our place within all societies all across the world. And the third, now is the time to end the infodemic plaguing our world. I think they mean you, Brian.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So you see how high up the list. There was 4, 5, and 6, but you see how high up the list the information war is, and how much they're concerned that they are losing the information war.
This is the key point, David. That every time they show concern for this, what they're really saying is they realise the power of social media, and it is causing them problems.
So back to the Secretary General's report, and you see here a little diagram. Everything leads towards a summit of the future, but we've got a social summit. We've got a transforming education summit. That's leading up to it. And then we've got high-level boards. We've got sustainable development, climate action, new agenda for peace. Not sure that's going awfully well. And all this huge range of issues all running simultaneously. So when you dig down into this and you get their list of things that they're going to be doing in preparation for the summit, it covers everything. This is a busy slide, but there's all sorts of subject matter in there and all sorts of initiatives all happening simultaneously. Zooming in on one or two, one, and this is talking about the new relationship between human beings and their governments, they're calling Leave No One Behind.
And they use that term for the children all the time,
yeah.
David, in the whole of the so-called child protection system, where the children are increasingly abused. It is Leave No Child Left Behind.
No child left behind.
Yeah.
And here, no one's going to be left alone as well, is another way of looking at it. So this is a renewed social contract again. Universal social protection, including healthcare and basic income security. So universal basic income is built in as one of the foundational bricks. It's highlighted norms. This is the key moments that they are seeking to use to transform our societies. So they've also got ensure sustainable financing. So the idea that central bank digital currency might be a conspiracy theory. No, we know the UN are looking at changing how financing operates across the world because they're telling us they are doing it. It's in their documents. It's got to support sustainable development goals. It's got to be fairer and more resilient. It's got to use new business models, but they're not saying what they are. So another issue is they're concentrating on place girls and women at the centre. And they say repeal of gender discriminatory laws. But this means that they're also repealing gender protection laws. They're talking about the repeal of all laws that protect women because they're gender discriminatory. So,
well, we're going to see some of that in a minute, David. Yeah.
And we're also seeing here that they're a very distorted diagram because all the proportions are wrong. But you see, global GDP can grow 50%, even though it's not shown at 50%, if we can overcome gender inequality in earnings. That's saying that women have to work the same number of hours that men have to work, right? So this is going to be coercing women into the workplace. I'm sorry you don't want to do that dangerous, unhealthy job, madam. But in order to meet our gender equality and global GDP objectives, you have to get down the coal mine. On you go. And then when we get into the social contract being rewritten, we see here the diagram again from the report, and zooming in on the central part of that, we see the individual, the private sector, the state institutions and civil society, the whole of society, are all involved in this renewed social contract, although there's not a lot of detail at the moment as to what exactly that is. And it did remind me a little bit of all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state from Benito Mussolini. This is the concept. Right? It's everything collectivized, everything working together, everything under a single point of control.
But for King's College, David, this is just too much to understand. If you ask any of the questions or the points that you're raising, now King's College is going to say, no, that's conspiracy theory. So we show the documents, we show the fact, but our poor staff, those professors in King's College, can't quite work it out in their own heads. That'll be the reframing.
That would be the reframing. Now, if that's not enough, we're into UN 2.0. The UN's not good enough. We're into UN 2.0, the Quintet of Change. Right? I thought that was a really funny title. What's the Quintet of Change? Well, it's focused on data, innovation, strategic foresight, behavioral science, and results.
And no other global organization has the legitimacy, the convening power and the normative impact of the UN. So the UN creates itself and then it says, we are the only people that can do this.
Yes. So just dig in a little more. Here's UN 2.0, the Quintet of Change. Right? And we see here, bottom right-hand corner, behavioral science. right? Leveraging behavioral science to improve UN family program and policy effectiveness and reduce bureaucratic processes. So behavioral science is one of the 5 ways they're going to change everyone's society in a top-down way. And it's interesting to note that when they look into this, they refer to the Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science, right, which concludes that behavioral science is a critical tool for the UN to progress on its mandate. It can contribute to combating poverty, improving public health and safety, and preventing and managing crisis, and promoting gender and economic equality, and tackling corruption, and strengthening peace building. And all the sustainable development goals, it's always brought back to sustainable development goals. At the same time, it's been used to make public sector more efficient and holds the potential in this area for the UN. And when looking for some examples, well, they start with Britain. And they start with an example of if you, rather than allow people to opt into pensions, force them to have to opt out, you get more people in the pension scheme. And this is very good. And they then also go on to the World Bank, because who else do you want to be controlling your
mind? Controlling your mind.
How people think and behave than the World Bank. And they say, well, it's worked very well with increasing tax compliance, because that's what we all want from our societies. And they say, well, in Poland, the World Bank found that peer comparisons increased tax compliance by 21%, but punitive language, that would be threatening people, increased tax compliance with 211%. So if you threaten and frighten people, they will pay up to be left alone. So that's jolly good.
That's known as a racket.
Yes. So going back to the Summit of the Future, it's coming soon, 2024. There's a summit in 2023 in September that may be the same one that Mark was talking about. And this is to look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And then in 2024, there's going to be a Summit for the Future, and it's going to produce a pact for the future. And we're already seeing some initial discussions about what's going to be in this. So we see here there's a concept note, informal consultations on the elements of the Summit from the Future. So the aim of this consultation is to have an open exchange on the scope and elements for this future summit. And what's it going to do? Well, it's going to reinvigorate the multilateral system and strengthen global governance. So there is a global government. They're talking about it very plainly. Global governance to respond to current and future challenges in line with the Charter on International Law. It's going to identify and address gaps in global governance. So we're concerned that there are gaps, which are obstacles to achieving Agenda 2030. And it's going to boost the implementation of UN 75 commitments, particularly Agenda 2030. So that's where we're going. And we're going there very quickly. So by the time we get to 1 year from now, there'll be a major summit on to agree all of this, set yet more goals, and they're going to be changing an entire contract between all of us and all of our societies and states and governments. They're going to be changing the role of women, and they're going to be changing many, many things. And of course, nobody has been discussing this. It's not been discussed in Parliament, and none of us have been consulted.
But we do have elected MPs who are discussing all of this at private meetings off in the sidelines. So a lot more to be said. Well, Mark, let's bring you back on screen. The topic is the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. Can we actually do something about these people?
This is an extremely interesting movement, gentlemen. One of the most interesting things I've seen in my 36 years of reporting. DefyTyrants.com is the website run by Matt Trewhella, a pastor from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He and I are in contact now, so I can keep getting firsthand news. This slide, after reading the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, people were on fire in Lapeer County, Michigan, shown there in red, a little bit northwest of Detroit. Men decided to run for county office, and they defeated the tyrants. What's going on here is Christian civics and the establishment in Michigan, which is very representative of the national and internationalist establishment, is scared to death of this. This is something they didn't see coming, in my estimation. Noting here on this one, a little bit of information. In February 2022, Pastor Matt Trewhella, and I spoke about this doctrine before in UK Column, spoke on the doctrine of the lesser magistrates in 5 counties in Michigan, and the people's hearts were on fire. they report. People ran for county government and they removed who are viewed as tyrants in 3 counties this past November. There's a video it references, and we'll watch that in just a minute here. 4 of the men who are now in county commissioners in Lapeer County, Michigan, are on that video we're going to see. Now that they are in authority at the county level, they're coming under attack from Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and who are regarded as evil Michigan legislators. We must support these newly elected people at the county level with our persons, with our property, with our prayers. This type of action can be done in your county too. Again, view defytyrants.com, and we'll move on from there. It mentions that the doctrine of the lesser magistrates came up a few centuries ago in Germany through the Protestant church. And America's founders, in this next slide it mentions, established America as a true federalism. In federalism, all 4 governments established by God, self, family, church, and civil government, are important, and they have their own role and functions and limits. In federalism, there are multiple levels of government and multiple branches at each level, so that if any one branch begins to play the tyrant, the other branches interpose, a very important word and concept, against that branch and resist them. The role of the people is massively important to this doctrine. They have a duty to prod and demand that their magistrates, that's elected officials at all levels, act against evil and against injustice, and to assure that the magistrates will stand with them if they do right. In other words, the public needs to assure the magistrates that they will stand with those magistrates if they do right. Now, this video really explains it in a very informative and dramatic way. So let's shoot whatever segment you guys put aside for this.
After COVID and with our state being shut down, seeing most of our elected officials basically doing the opposite of what we were wanting them to do. They told me and everybody else that we're not going to do anything to protect you from vaccine mandates, mask mandates, or from being fired from your job for not taking a vaccine. And at that point, I was like, this is like the last straw for me. And after realizing that our state government wasn't going to do anything, we started getting involved in county government.
This is where everything starts. It starts at the grassroots. You've got to get involved at the grassroots, and I think this is where I could have made a difference and what was happening in my business and my employees and my family. You know, my freedom and liberty doesn't end where somebody else's fear begins. You know, this is a constitutional right. There was no science behind the mask mandate. There was no science really at all behind what they called a vaccine. And I told the commission in the presence of the health director that was there that if they did this again to us, that I would not comply and that you would have to come and arrest me.
That was basically a dictatorship is what our governor did. You know, it affected my family. My mother is in a nursing home. We had Christmas with my mother on cell phones through a window, locked down like it's a prison. It's wrong. And the utter disrespect shown to the people. I mean, you're a public official, you're supposed to be working for the people, and they weren't working for the people, they were working for their own self-interest.
They don't care what people want. Over 100 people at this meeting, and the officials just don't care. They just don't care. We have to stop blaming each other. We have to start getting up and doing something, even if it's something we've never done before, ever. Christian people that call themselves Christians, read history, read the Bible. In the Bible, you'll see God's people over and over and over and over standing up, some of them being at the highest level of civil authority. If Christian principles are not being upheld and promoted, then evil will be. So if things are going in the wrong direction, the worst thing you could do is see something need to be done and don't do something. We want to speak, we want to talk, but we don't put no actions to our words. I think the time has come where that's not going to work anymore. Somebody has to stand up and stand in the gap. I have 5 little children. I don't want my children to pay for the iniquities of their fathers.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you for that.
Very, very powerful stuff there. And I can share just a little bit more here, keeping an eye on time, of course. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of Michigan in Ottawa County, members of a lesser magistrates-oriented group have a majority on the county board there too. So Lapeer County and Ottawa County are very prominent in this movement in Michigan. And the internationalist-oriented, highly democratic, ultra-liberal socialist government here in Lansing is, again, they're scared to death of this. This is the worst thing for them. And on a larger scale, this would be something that would undercut the UN system that you guys described earlier and what its plans are. And I'll just have you show one more slide here. It's like a flyer. I believe you have that. That's Pastor Matt Trujella. And there's a August 12 Angola, Indiana program. He's speaking there. I'm going to be there and cover his speech, and I'll have an additional report.
Mark, thank you very much for that. It's very striking that this is possible, particularly in America, because of the amount of liberty that still exists there and the amount of democracy right down to the low levels. And it's very heartening that people are standing up and using that to push back. And you're quite right. It's a huge threat to the UN agenda. Brian.
If I may just make one more quick comment. I loved what the one speaker on the video said. My liberty does not end where someone's fear begins. That one got me. That's powerful stuff.
It is indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mark. Well, let's end the news by really showing people why each and every one of us needs to stand up and do something. And a big thank you to the UK column viewer and supporter that sent an email through to me. It was to do with what was circulating on Telegram, but it was about a drag camp by Tart Productions. But what was significant about this was that this was aimed at youngsters. Now, originally it said a drag camp for 14 to 18-year-olds. I did a little bit of work, and I think I'm right in saying that actually it's for 13-year-olds and above. But let's go and have a look at Tart Productions. And of course, the word is chosen deliberately to be salacious, inclusive, queer camp. Here's a picture of some of the amazing people involved. But you only have to delve into the website a little bit to see that there's a button which is youth. So we've got cabaret, social classes, youth. And I could click onto that youth button in order to find this sort of thing. A drag camp, which is coming soon, specifically targeted at young people. Now, remember that this is specifically adult sexual entertainment is what drag acts are about, but this is targeted at children. We've got a bit more. We've got what they're calling Fruity, a drag show for kids coming in 2023, 2024. But where is all this coming from? Well, who's supporting it and helping to pay for it? None other than Oxford City Council. So I did a little bit of research on their website. I went to have a look at their grant page, and what did I find pretty quickly? Here it is. Tart Productions to support running a 5-day course in drag performance for young people 13 to 18 in partnership with Pegasus Theatre. So no ifs or buts here. We've got Oxford City Council. That means that locally elected councillors have been supporting what's taking place here.
Must be.
And that means that anybody that is brave enough to stand up to challenge those local councillors and get themselves elected in their place can do something about that. But what's your take on this, David? It's horrific.
It's absolutely astonishing. So we've got a situation where in practice the age of consent has been reduced to 13 in Scotland and many parts of the United Kingdom. We've got this huge tendency to sexualise the young through the education system and through external consultants and specialists coming into the education system to run courses like this, and through the basic sex ed process. And at the same time, we're being told that these young people are not actually, their brains aren't fully developed and they can't really make decisions until they're 25. Yep. It makes no sense. It's not coherent, and it's clearly grooming. It's clearly hostile towards proper development of our young people. And to allow this to happen to them and say nothing is really giving up our responsibility to the next generation to protect them from harm.
So UK Column decided to do something about it. We did it this morning while we were preparing the news. I sent an email to the press team, having spoken to the press lady beforehand to ask if there was any formal statement from Oxford City Council. We wrote, "Dear press team, a number of members of the public have contacted us in the last few days. They're deeply concerned that Oxford City Council is providing financial support for the organisation TARP Productions to train children from the age of 13 in the subject of drag queen adult sexual entertainment. Please can you provide me with a formal statement from the leader, Councillor Susan Brown, on behalf of Oxford City Council as to why the council is providing funding for TARP Productions to teach children in adult sexual entertainment skills. Many responsible adults would regard this explicit form of entertainment training as the deliberate sexual grooming of children. Can you also explain what risk assessment has been carried out by Oxford City Council as part of its child protection responsibilities with regard to this explicit sexual training and its effects on the young children exposed to it? UK will be making an initial report on this matter at 1 o'clock today, and we will be pleased to make your response available to the public in our subsequent follow-up news reports. Thank you for your assistance. I look forward to your response." So once again, UK Column took the lead. We hope other people will follow. But let's reinforce this dreadful grooming, sexual grooming of our children with another communication I had over the weekend. This was sent through to me, and it was a comment on Peter Tatchell. It says, "Peter Tatchell is here saying that a 9-year-old was able to consent to and enjoy sex with an adult man. How victims of child sexual abuse rationalize and deal with their abuse when adults has nothing whatsoever to do with the validity of consent to sex offered by a 9-year-old. This is a grown man who's in the story commenting that he had sex when he was 9 and there was no problem. But let's have a listen to the actual clip from Peter Tatchell so we can really understand what's going on here.
Famous filmmaker Derek Jarman, who sadly has died, he told me when he was about 50 that he had had sex with a young man when he was 9 years old. He said it was his choice. He said he wasn't pressured or manipulated. He said he had no regrets about that sexual experience. So my view is, that's what he's saying. It's his personal view as an adult, mature man looking back on his childhood. If he says that, who am I or you to dispute it? Now, I accept that most sex involving young people is abusive and wrong. His view is perhaps exceptional, but it's not a view that should be dismissed and denied. If an adult person looks back on an early sexual experience and says they consented to it, they were not pressured, they were not harmed, they have no regrets or complaint, I think we should do the honest thing and accept their viewpoint.
Okay.
So this is blurring the lines, isn't it? This is creating a wedge. It's not always wrong. Okay, it's mostly wrong, but it's not always wrong. So this is creating just a little bit of movement towards accepting the MAP, minor attracted person, paedophile community as a sexual orientation.
Indeed. We'll leave it there. A tough end to the news today. We realise this, but of course this is reality. Our children and families being attacked. The objective is complete breakdown. Can we do something about it? Of course we can, if enough of us stand up to be counted.
We have one final slide. We talked today about how the main thing that's worrying the Club of Rome is whether people can tell the difference between truth and fiction. Well, we can certainly tell the difference between the truth and the BBC. Here we see, I think this is a Bob Moran cartoon, and the BBC man's urinating on a member of the public, and he's saying it's raining. And the member of the public says, and it's warm, it must be climate change.
We'll end there, David. Thank you very much for that. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. And to our audience, don't just watch UK Column. It's time to stand up and do something. Thank you very much. We will be back for Extra, UK Column Extra, in a few minutes. So if you're a signed up subscriber with us, join us then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.